Hello Internet, and welcome to another Wednesday's Serial. This time I am going to be examining a age-old comic. Well, maybe not that old, but it's some X-Men. X-Men Unlimited, to be exact. So hey, there are a ton of things about this series that I like. It was a short-lived little fun thing. It started in 2004. There's a Spider-Man sister book, if you will, that I'm curious to try to find now. But what I really like about this is each issue is two stories with various X-Men characters. Sometimes it's a little themed. But what's really cool is it's two smaller stories, right? Like this is I think it's a slightly bigger comic, but I mean this is pretty much a normal comic. You're getting two tales. That means it's small, it's emotional, it's about the characters, and this really felt like a lot of what drew me to the X-Men throughout the years, and a lot through what brought me to comics that I just haven't seen as much lately, and that's why I wanted to talk about this so much. So the first one really took me off. It was a Tony Lee story with Ben and Riley on pencils. I'm not going to list every creator, but Sage was the character. She was this 2000s X-Men character that had like a cyber brain. It's very clear someone watched Ghost in the Shell and wanted it in their X-Men, and that's what this character was. So she's able to like calculate things. So she's a master martial artist, and she's able to calculate all these whatever you calculate and process to the net. And with her weirdo shade, she can like access things. So while she's talking about robbing this one place, she's watching a movie and communicating with this other person. It's just really interesting take, because really all it did is introduce me to this character, because I think I saw her somewhere before, but no idea about her. So this made it felt like I knew her in a way that like summed up those old like trading cards or quick biopics of superhero characters that you'd want to know, like a little bit about them, their supposed age, their power set, and maybe a little bit about their personality. But I mean, you get so much more of that in a handful of pages. The second one was about this monster kid, written by J.T. Cruel, but this little monster kid was able to go out for Halloween and feel like a normal kid for like about an hour until things kind of hit the fan again. It was just a sad, quaint little X-Men story that made a lot of sense. It was just really cool. There was this Bishop comic which led to District X and kind of really set what that comic was going to be about. It was cool, but that was probably the most like advertising mini story that was of the bunch. We had a couple with Gambit, kind of playing with him being a thief and whatnot. Not super strong, but honestly a decent Gambit story and whatnot. We had one here about Juggernaut wanting to teach kids, and there was a lot of reservations about it because it's Juggernaut and he is just bad with kids and he had this temper. But they kind of show, like, even though he was kind of losing his temper, he's getting it under control, and also that, like, no matter what you do, if a kid's being a punk, you're gonna lose it a little bit. And so what's really interesting with that was throughout this chunk of X-Men, Cyclops was the headmaster, and seeing him in that role of like full leadership, but also really rarely seeing the X-Men being superheroes here, but mostly seeing them be running a school and dealing with mutants and kind of more of what the X-Men are supposed to be about. And I found it so interesting. If you pull back from the superhero and the action adventure stuff that we normally thrust this into, and you let the characters just play off of each other with all this associated history, it's almost more interesting. It made me remember, this was coming off the heels of like the Grant Morrison and the Joss Whedon stuff, Astonishing and New X-Men, and whereas there was all the crazy stuff going on, there's also a lot of times of it being a school, and there was some plays with school violence at the time, which was a hotter topic at the time than it is now, maybe not, but they were playing with it, at least here in the comics, and it made for an interesting mesh of bringing, the action to it, but also giving it a dark angle that was socially relevant. And that's the thing, if the X-Men aren't socially relevant, it's usually a bad run. if they are socially relevant, it tends to be where they're strongest. There are exceptions either way, but no. The next is the one you had to worry about, but this comes up a bit later. The fifth one was just this Wolverine one, but it was like the 50th or something anniversary of Wolverine. I forget which date it was, but it was a celebration of Wolverine annual, and two decent Wolverine stories kind of playing with him more as a teacher here in one aspect. One where Cyclops puts him in a situation where he has to be a leader of this army, and in order for him to pull through, he has to rely on others because the numbers are too great. It's not that he couldn't deal with it himself, but he can't save the village and deal with all these people in time by himself, so he has to learn to be a leader. And it's part of Cyclops prepping Wolverine to be a leadership, which was something I liked. Like, there's a lot of antagonism, but they were basically brothers in arms at this point. They really had an understanding for each other. And this was the only comic I think I've read that when, Schism came along and them being friends, it felt kind of weird, but made a sense. This is the comic where I'm like, oh, this really makes sense, this friendship between them after so many years. Another semi-problematic one of the stories in here in issue 6, it's the girls talking, and they're the Blackbird's like under the sea, or one of the mini Blackbirds, I don't know, one of the planes, and Storm's freaking out because she's getting claustrophobic because they're under and things are crushing, and she can't feel her powers, which I always thought was a cool connection of her being so powerful, but if you confine her and kind of limit her power and her ability to feel free, she wigs out. That's always such a cool character play to me. And it can be overused, Storm's claustrophobia, but it's where we're at here. But the more painful part here was in order to relax, they start having girl talk and start talking about boys. And I was like, God, that's a little... But I also realized I've never seen that with X-Men. And just like the girls talking about dudes, I don't know, it seems so innocent and fun when I pulled back, but at first I was like, that's a little... So, I don't know. There's a beautiful Nightcrawler story in here where he returns to his village and deals with some loose ends with the family. It really plays on that monster idea again. This one blew me away. It was a story about Angel, obviously, and he just him dealing with a situation Cyclops puts him in where he assumes that it's just going to be about money, but it ends up the more important thing is for him talking about overcoming and dealing with the tragedy in his life, and you kind of realize like how much Angel has gone through, and so that was really strong for me, and I liked that. I'm just looking ahead here. Yeah. In this issue, Wolverine dies, and it was by Sam Keith, and this was probably one of the weakest stories of the bunch. Yeah. There was there's 2 issues with the Beast in here, and one was really powerful where he's made to play guidance counselor. And he really likes it at first because the kids seem to have gravitated towards him, but you realize there's a lot of like lip service and whatnot, and the kids were just being kind of nasty and jerks. But he ends up making a difference for a couple of them, and it was just kind of this interesting play with such a interesting character. Issue 11 deals with grief in the X-Men universe as Marvel Girl, who is Jean's daughter, is dealing with Jean's death and the fact that Scott is just launching right into Emma's arms right away, and she's very not okay with it. And Havoc's trying to like defend his brother, but at the same time it's like, yeah, it is a little weird. And it was just like this family drama thing. It was the Summers family drama, but played out in a way that was completely soap drama. And that's where the X-Men are supposed to be half the time, and realizing that this is about where it got played in some, C-list X-Men book is kind of crazy to me, because that's the Claremontian thing to do. That's the bread and butter that the X-Men are built upon. So weird. This was a shitty two Wolverine story things. Both these stories were garbage. Um, this was kind of a more actiony, adventure-y X-Men one. I wasn't as big on it, but then in the back there was an Iceman story, and playing with this idea that, you know, he's supposed to be the fun-loving one, but he was writing this note about him resigning and how he can't deal with all the stress and how things are so much more dire than they used to be and all the different things. Like, it became so dark. And then at the end, he throws the letter in this drawer with another stack of resignation letters. And he just kind of goes out and is the jolly guy. And it's like, that's his therapy. That was such a powerful issue. And again, we deal with death. Colossus. This wasn't really Colossus's issue or story as much as it was Magic's, where she's... So, Magic had just died in the X-Men canon. It's okay, she gets better. That's part of the problem. So, at this point she was dead, and Piedor is looking at the statue of her and thinking back to when the Morlocks had all died. And she was so frustrated, and she said, we need to be able to do something. Some of our friends come back, and there's this... Think about it. I mean, a younger person who's tied to this, you know, mutant community, you know, there's this huge tragedy of these poor souls that just got massacred. And she wants to do something about it. It's not right. It's horrible. It's retching apart, and it's just like the conversation at the time, and it's the thing. Like that happens so much more now, I feel like. I just was able to get right into that mindset, and it's horrible, but you're like, okay. She's like, I want to bring them back, and you're like, okay, we're dealing with X-Men, and yeah, that makes sense. And she goes and looks and tries to save them using magic, and she just, like, can't. It's not exactly clear if it's an ability or an emotional thing or what, but she lacks it, and she realizes death is death, and she just has to let it go, and she comes back, and her and Colossus kind of reconsole, and you're like, it really hit me. And then he's looking at her, you know, thinking, like, I would love nothing more to bring her back, but death is permanent. And I'm like, well, yeah, but she comes back anyways. And it's so interesting because it's one of those, like, this was one of those powerful reestablishing death in comics that happens every now and again. And of course, it's been undermined by the continual whatnot, and I think it was Bendis' fault this time for this one. So, but, man, just these smaller, shorter stories, emotional focused, more focused on the school and less about the action-adventure stuff, really got me, really reminded me why I love these characters and why I loved X-Men, and interestingly gave me no itch to go buy more modern X-Men, because I realized this sort of thing is something past. This is before Disney took over. This is before we have whatever is causing our modern set of comics, and kind of, it was a bittersweet kind of thing for me, but I enjoyed the read through. If you're curious by any of these, I'm sure if you can find them, they're not expensive. So, rock on, and I hope to get you all soon with another comic review.